Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, The Art of Visual Inquiry, Increasing Understanding with Connections in the Brain. My name is Matt Caton, and today we're really going to be talking about using the brain and all the advantages of visualization of connected content and how that applies to basically teachers and students learning from your brain, understanding all of the information that's going into your brain so that your own organic brain actually gets smarter from the data you're putting into your digital brain. Now, throughout today's webinar, Jay Ofemi will be handling all of the questions. And I see here that I'm not, Charles is saying that there's no audio right now. Please let me know, everyone, if you can hear me okay. If not, I'll be certain to call in on another number. Claudio can hear me. Great. Thank you very much. Excellent. Thank you, Lee, Peter, Charles. Got it. So if anyone's having trouble with the audio, there's many options to, well, you can't hear me talk about it, but I'm sure they'll figure out to either call in or join the computer audio. So regardless, again, Jay Ofemi will be answering questions in the GoToMeeting question panel today, and I'll be taking you through many different brain examples and talking on the topic of using the brain as a study guide, building a knowledge base, better analyzing relationships and understanding of how your information fits together. Now, we've done this webinar before, and we've shared a couple of really our own personal brains that we create at TheBrain Technologies on subjects that we are continuing to study moving on. So I'll be opening up my Shakespeare brain. I have a sample teaching and learning brain, but I thought a really great example to get things started today, particularly under the subject of using your brain as a study guide, is the brain's own digital knowledge base. Now, the brain that I have open on the screen right now is a brain that you can visit online. We created a brain about the brain and actually synced it to the Brain Cloud so it can be accessed online, and it is the Brain Study Guide, the Brain Knowledge Base, to help you understand how the application works in the application itself. So I thought it was very fitting to use this particular brain to get started today. So let's really start at the absolute very beginning very quickly, and then we'll talk more about on-topic visualizing relationships and the type of data that you're putting into your brain. So you can download a sample brain from our website, www.thebrain.com. You'll have a free 30-day trial of all the features of the Brain application. And at the end of that 30 days, you can choose whether you purchase some type of license or stay on the free version of the Brain with limited features, but still having access to the Brain data that you've created. And once you've downloaded the Brain and installed the application and create your first Brain database, you'll see that the application is divided into two main components. We have what we call the Plex on one side of the screen and the content window on the other. Now, I don't say Plex on the left, content on the right, because there are many different configurations of the Brain application that you can use to best fit how your own organic brain works. And you can see that the two segments, the Plex and the content window, are divided by a line with a couple of buttons where I can simply click to change to an over-under format of the application, click again, and then click the left-right buttons to flip-flop notes on the left and Plex over on the right. So it's really whatever best fits your screen real estate and your manner of thinking. And of course, we can minimize from time to time. If I'm just really focused on the Plex or really focused on the notes, I can click on buttons to sort of zoom one out of the way for the time being until I want to bring that back. So many different configuration options available to you. And pieces of information in the brain are what we call thoughts. And the thoughts are really the building blocks of the brain. So anytime I click on a thought, it brings that thought into the very center of the Plex and displays all related information around it. So we always call that the active thought. And when I click on another, it becomes the active thought and displays, once again, closely related information. So below the active thought, we have child thoughts, or subcategories of the active thought. To the right, we have siblings. A sibling shares one or more of the same parent thought up above. So parent thought, active, and child thoughts down below. And that's the basic structure of the brain that you put together. So you're basically drilling down into more finite components of information. Here I've got the brain knowledge base and the 6 primary categories of the knowledge base. Whether you're getting started, moving on to just the basics, advanced features, and then even further advanced, synchronizing, sharing, and additional information. So let's jump ahead into the basics, and I'll click on customizing your brain's environment. So let's say you've created a brain, but now you notice, hey, I can have some nice wallpaper, or I can change the fonts over in the notes. I'm going to click on brain themes and styles. So that's the current active thought. And it loads up over on the right. Anytime I select a subject, I'll click on any one of these, and the notes will appear over on the right. Actually, let me go to a thought with some note content. There we go. So as you can see, the note loads up over on the right. Now the notes are one of the key features of the brain application. Every thought that you create will always have its own note. It'll start off as a blank note, and it's up to you to add that content, whether you choose to copy and paste into the notes, to preserve key pieces of information in a book you're reading or a subject that you're studying, or if you are writing the document itself and you just want to take some quick notes over on the right. The notes are designed for quick capture ideas and information that is portrayed in a very consistent layout. So you've got some very basic fundamental sort of toolbar options up above, formatting styles for the notes that you create. I always remind users that if you are designing a wedding invitation, or you need to put together a table with calculated cells and in an Excel spreadsheet, those are the times when you add a file attachment to a thought, which is an option as well. So beyond notes, you're moving into actual design of a document or layout, what have you. You may need some more advanced features. It's time to add just a file attachment to a thought within the brain that you're creating. And as you can see, I can scroll down through the notes to read this information and find other related pieces of information. So customizing the theme colors. If I want to select one of my different themes, I can click, and again, it loads up the content for that thought that I've clicked on. So here's all about selecting a particular theme for a brain. So one of the pre-built-in wallpapers and designs that we have. Now notice that we've got another component appearing in the Plex. Now we have what we like to call a jump thought. And a jump thought is something that's related to the active thought, but not necessarily fitting into any type of hierarchical structure. So this is the perfect example. We've got an actual video tutorial of actually me setting up a new brain theme in a brain. So it looks good. You want to know a little bit more about how this is done. You actually want to see it happen live on someone else's screen. So there's a great video tutorial. So notice I could have had this linked as a child thought down below, selecting a theme and then brain themes, or linked as a parent. It's really a personal choice as you're building your brain. When you decide you want to connect something as a subcategory or as a jump thought or as a parent above the current topic, that is a very, very personal choice when you are developing and creating your brain. And it's important to point out that you can always go back and modify. So you can actually change exactly how you want your brain structured. So I'm going to click and drag this back over. And notice when I click on my jump thought, it just takes me into that area of the brain. Now, this area of the brain is a cluster or a grouping of sort of a different topic. These are all video tutorials for sort of intermediate concepts of the brain application. So a jump thought takes you to a different area of the same brain, but on a closely related topic. So many times you'll see, and you'll probably see when I open up some of my own brains, a jump thought is typically linking to a person that is an expert in that topic, or a reference to the subject that I'm looking into. So if I'm putting together a paper for my thesis, and where did I find this great valuable information? Well, that was found in the encyclopedia, or from a from a book that was written in the 1800s or what have you. So it's not the cause of the information, it's just a component, and closely related to that is its source. So I simply have that linked as a jump thought. Very personal choice as to when you want to select something as a child, jump, or parent, or when you want to link them, I should say. Now, so far in this brain that I've been navigating through, I've also simply been clicking to get from one related topic to the next. Also, as you are developing your brain, you'll find there are many different options and ways to navigate through a brain. And we're going to be talking about that in detail today. So step one is just to simply click from thought to thought to thought and find all related pieces of information. But sometimes you want to get to a thought that you're frequenting, whether it's here I'm putting together a knowledge base for a product, a training guide, and I'm really focused on, let's just say, editing thoughts. There's a lot of different ways to edit thoughts within the brain. And so I'm highlighting this area and reviewing the content that I have maybe before I make this brain public. So I want to get to this thought often. I'm going to right click and select to create a pin. And a pin is just a really nice shortcut to a thought that you happen to be frequenting while you're building your brain, or simply while you're using your brain. And again, when I open up my own personal brain databases, you'll see that I've got pins to frequently visited thoughts. So now I can continue on with this brain. Let's say I'm just using this as my study guide, and I'm back over to more advanced features and starting to look into managing events in the brain timeline and Google Calendar Sync. And I want to go back and say, oh, well, wait a minute, I want to be able to edit those thoughts to identify whether it has an event in the timeline associated with it, or I want to rename the thought accordingly. So how do I edit the thought or edit the link? I need to get back to that area that I'm frequenting, and that is my pin. So a pin is just a really, really nice shortcut. As your brain continues to grow and evolve, you'll find how useful those pins can be. And of course, at any time, I can right click and just simply remove that shortcut, remove that pin from the brain. And also you can do a search within a brain as well. It's very important to point that out, that obviously the brain that you're putting together for your research, for your writing project, for your students or your teacher, at any time, if you are in a particular area of the brain, you need to find something else. Do I have a reference to a particular topic elsewhere in this brain? I can simply do a search. And notice that when I clicked on the search box, it said icon, because the most recent thing that I clicked on in this brain was a thought for icons. Let's go ahead and go back there now. So I'll just type in icon. And notice as I'm typing, the brain's list continues to sort of shrink down and match whatever it is I've typed in so far. And the brain is looking through not only all of the thought names, but all of your notes and file attachments as well. I don't see any file attachments, but I do see the word icon appears in 2 different thoughts and 3 different notes as well. Let's do maybe a more common word. I'll type in the word brain. So 691 matches to the word brain in this particular brain. And above are all my thought matches, and down below are all of my notes and internal attachments. And then there will be a third category down below for external attachments. This brain should have no external attachments. We can talk about why a little bit later. But regardless, there are all of my notes. And if I scroll down, I've got quite a few notes. Here are all of my actual file attachments. So this brain has a lot of different files actually peppered throughout the brain. And so these are either PNG files, as you can see the name of the PNG, but I think there's some Excel spreadsheets and even a couple of PDF documents. There's a PDF, so the Team Brain User Guide, and I can click and go right to that thought. So it's not just that the word brain actually appeared in the thought name itself or in the file name, but actually the file content. So anything that is, if I do a search for companion guide, for example, there you can see I can type in the word companion, and it's showing me that the Team Brain User Guide contains the word companion inside the document. So your search is being done actually by your operating system. Windows Desktop Search, if you're on a Mac, it is the Mac Spotlight or Spotlight Search that searches through all of the data that's going into your brain and gives you very speedy, very rapid response results in the search, and very accurate as well. And at any time, you can click on the search results as I've done to go directly to that thought. And this takes us to another component that, again, we'll be talking about throughout the day, is that not only can thoughts in your brain have file attachments, but there can be links to videos, as you've already seen, as well as documents, spreadsheets, any digital type of document can be associated in some capacity with a thought in the brain. And adding new content into a brain is a very easy process as well. So before we leave our brain knowledge base, and by the way, everyone has access to this brain, not necessarily the desktop version of the brain, but the online version. I saw that question actually in my sort of peripheral vision pop up a couple of times. Where can I get a copy of this brain? Many of the brains that I'll share with you today, you can actually download a copy of from our website. This particular brain there's a link on our website. And at the conclusion of today's webinar, I'll send everyone out either a link or a location where they can download several of the brains that we demoed today. So in this brain, let's go right back to that icons. I think that might be a good area where we can add a new thought. So again, I'm on a thought called the brain icons, and information about icons within the brain show up on the right. And it looks like down below, we've got a thought for adding custom icons. This particular brain continues to grow and evolve. It's not just a digital copy of our user guide. Our user guide is a PDF on our website that can be downloaded. We add new information depending on frequent questions that come into the brain technologies. We add them into this particular brain so that others can learn from them. And let's say the question recently came up. Actually, I was on this thought because I was looking to see if we mentioned the recommended file size for icons. If you are going to be using these instructions and adding your own custom icons into the brain, if you add a .ico file, it doesn't work. A .bitmap, not a good idea. Those files are too large. So I'm going to create a new thought, and I do that by clicking and dragging off of a gate. And that's really one of the easiest way to add new content into the brain. There are many different options. We can drag and drop files. We can use keyboard shortcuts. But as you've seen, I like to drag and drop off of the gate. And each brain has thoughts with 3 individual gates: the child gate, the jump gate, and the parent gate. So I click and drag, and I'll create a new thought called actually, I'm just going to call this file, if I can type today, file size. And I'm going to come back and rename that in just a moment as well. But first, I've created a new thought called file size. And again, over in the notes, I can just click and start typing. And the is 48 by 48 PNG. Never use a .ico or a BNP file. So just some basic instructions. I can come back and add a bit of flourish, add icons or images rather at a later date, but I'll just quickly add that information so that when I sync this brain out to the cloud, anyone visiting this brain, and I'll just manually sync right now, will have that information available to them, the recommended file size. Now, I mentioned earlier, what if I want to come back and edit this thought? You can Alt-click on any thought in the brain to open up its thought properties display. And here is where we can add, you see many different thoughts have different icons associated with them, color codes. We're going to talk in a bit about thought tags and types. I can say file size and type recommendation. And if I want to add an icon, I'll just click. Since this is all about icons, let's go ahead and add an icon. There you can see is my custom icon directory. A little picture of me. No one wants to see that. So I'll just add a little brain icon there. So file size and type recommendation for custom icons. So just add a little bit of flourish to really bring my attention to that particular thought that I've just added here into the brain. So let's go ahead and jump out of this brain now and into another sample brain to share another topic of today's topic, which is analyzing relationships. And for that, I'm going to jump into the teacher and learning brain. Now, actually, I already started on the thought that I was going to jump to. Let's just go to the home thought. Let me give you a quick tour of this particular brain, because this is an actual brain database that you can download to use as a sandbox to just sort of play around with the brain technology, or maybe there's a course or a topic in this brain that you really like. You can delete the unwanted content that you don't need and utilize the information available in this brain to continue on building on the topic that you're interested in. So this is a very, very sort of on-point brain for today's topic, using the brain for not only visualization, but teaching and learning. Both sort of, I guess I would say, ends of the spectrum are well represented in this particular brain. So whether you're looking at administration of an educational institution, best practices to follow. We've got just a lot of courses and topics, etc. Courses for whether you're students or teachers. Let's just go ahead and start clicking down into science and chemistry. No, I know a little bit more about biology. So we'll go into living things. And we've basically, in this particular brain, this area maps out the animal kingdom. Notice that content that is related to the topic is coming up in the right-hand side of the screen. So we've attached notes and documents and links to web pages. And I can click all the way down from the kingdom to the phylum. Let's go into core data. And below phylum is the class. So we'll say mammals. And then we finally started getting into something that we're more familiar with, which is the order, and then the species, or the family, and then the species themselves. So family and the genus, not species, rather. So we'll look at lions and tigers. And then below there are the actual species. And of course, as you can see, when you click, sometimes we've got content. So I've got a Word document that's all about tigers, and a zoomable icon. We'll talk about zoomable icons today too, adding that nice sort of visual reference to thoughts. And then from there, we talk about below is something closely related. I might have this linked up actually as a jump thought. Shelley actually created this incredible brain. It's a very large brain with a lot of data. But as you can see, this is linked up to environmental impact and deforestation, which falls under one of the courses that we're talking about currently in science. So all of that related information and being able to navigate through a brain, I got into that information about the effects of species and deforestation by going through the animal kingdom brain. I could have gone directly into my science category and talk about current lessons, got to the thought that way as well. So there are many different ways to navigate to data and reference data because of those cross relationships. And this being just a very simple one, this document falls under the current science topic we're talking about, as well as being related to tigers and so on, which is mapped out inside my animal kingdom area of the brain. Let's jump out of science and into sort of a hot topic these days, US presidents. But as you can see, this particular area of the brain is actually falling under history and the United States government. I think there used to be more linked up here, but we've got a lot of information about sort of how the US government is set up under the history area. And as you can see, the presidents are mapped out here in order. So now let's talk about different ways to display content within the brain. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually give myself a little more screen real estate. I'm going to minimize the notes so I'm full screen with the plex of the brain. And I'm already noticing in this brain, it's a little bit outdated. This is a brain that you can download. It's a little bit outdated, so we can add a new thought, 45, and of course, my organic brain is failing me. Of course, it's Donald Trump, and you know, I try to stay completely apolitical during sharing this particular brain. It's a very hot topic right now, but the importance is this is just simply factual information. The list of the US presidents in order. But something very important has been done to this particular area of the brain, and that is we've set up thought types. Now, a thought type is a classification of a particular thought. So you notice if I hover over Woodrow Wilson, for example, I see that his text appears in blue. Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat. And if I go under Calvin Coolidge, president number 30, was a Republican. So now I'm visually identifying not only the presidents in order, but I can see what political party they were affiliated with. And this is interesting. There's Millard Fillmore. He was a Federalist. It's funny that I've shared this brain with other users in the past and people that are interested in US history, et cetera, that honestly did not know that there were some Federalist presidents. And this is something that shocked me when I first started utilizing this area of the brain. There were two presidents that had no political affiliation. Great trivia question. Hang on to that one. James Monroe and George Washington officially have no political party that they were associated with. That might be somewhat debatable, but for the most part, if you pull up the Wikipedia page, do your own research, what have you, no political affiliation. So another layer of context that's being visualized. You could look at a list of presidents online and in a number of different places, but to actually visually see which ones fall into which political group and to quickly organize those. Let's do a little comparison of Federalist versus Republican versus Democrat. I'm just going to right click on the background behind the brain and select to arrange my thought types arrange my thoughts by thought type. And notice that the brain restructures or regroups how all of the thoughts are being displayed. And grouped together are all of our Democrats. And then I've got 5 Federalists, followed by, there's the grouping of Republicans and parties with no political affiliation. Now, Donald Trump does have a political affiliation. So I'm going to alt-click on this thought and go down to thought type. And this is my list of existing thought types that I've created so far. I've got an existing thought type, so I'll select that Donald Trump is Republican, and now he's categorized with that information there in my brain. Let's say President 46 comes along. I'm not making any crystal ball prophecies here, but we'll say 46 is, we're just going to say Sarah Smith. So completely made up name, but there's Sarah Smith. Let's say that Sarah has a brand new political party called the School Party. And so I'm going to click once again on Sarah's thought. Anytime you click on the current active thought or alt-click on any thought in the brain, you're opening up the thought properties display. And so I've opened up the thought properties display and I can set up my thought type. Now, the school party, this new political party that I am inventing, doesn't exist yet, both realistically and hypothetically here in my brain. So I'm going to type in school party and select that this is a new thought type. So it creates that thought type for me. I can now click on school party. I'll click again to open up its thought properties. And I can define the icon that we want associated with this party, what colors we want them to show up. You saw that we had yellow for Federalist, red for Republican, blue for Democrat. So we can select a stock icon if we want. Again, I'll go into here, I'll just go to business and that's building, sorry, business. And the school party has a little number 1 associated with it. Notice that gets applied to all thoughts that are assigned that thought type. And I can click once again to open up the properties and say all school party thought types will have, we've already done blue, let's do green. So we'll show up with green text. And now when I go back to my list of US presidents, there they all are. We've got our Democrats, our Federalists, our Republicans, and now this new party that I've created, this school party. So it's very easy to create these thought types, and there's so many different topics that you can fit them into, and so many different scenarios, I should say, when you want to use a thought type to classify your thought groupings of thoughts, phase 1, phase 2, approved versus non-approved, etc. So it works in so many scenarios. We can never share all the different examples. So it's really whatever is important to you, important to the brain that you're putting together. But this brings us to the next component, which is how do we delete content within a brain? How do we clean information up? Obviously, this information is fictitious. It doesn't exist. So I'm first going to go to my school party thought type, and I right-click and I simply select to delete. So that school party thought type, you can just right-click on a thought type by activating it within the brain and delete that thought type. Sarah, once again, that thought doesn't belong there, so I am going to right-click. Now with a native thought, not a thought type, but an actual thought that I've created, the step 1 is to forget that particular thought. Forgetting a thought is like throwing a thought into your recycle bin. It's still there, and it can be brought back at any time, but it's not permanently deleted. So to delete that thought, I'm going to go into options and select show forgotten thoughts. There's my Sarah Smith thought once again. I right-click, and now I can select to either remember or delete. And I'll delete that Sarah Smith thought. So I've very quickly removed that temporary thought that I just created. You can also run reports. I won't have time to get into reports today, but you can run reports in the brain to find all thoughts of a certain thought type or a thought tag, to delete forgotten thoughts, etc. And once again, since we are on the subject of thought types and thought tags, you can find all thoughts of a particular type and tag. In this case, they're all grouped together. But let's say I want to find all of my thoughts that are typed disease. I can click, and this disease area is under a medical research area of the brain. They're not all linked together under one category, illnesses or something like that. So if I click on diabetes, you can see that diabetes falls under this biology lesson. So it's sort of floating out there all alone. It's still a disease, but it's currently under one of the biology lessons that we're currently studying. And if I want to see all different diseases elsewhere throughout this very large brain, I can simply click to see all thought types of a certain type. So all my Democrats, there they are. All of my Republicans, I can go to the Republican thought type and find them all at once. And this, again, is how you can say, all right, I want to give a new color or a new icon or some type of other quality to all of the thoughts that are of this type. This is where I can actually open up the thought properties display to make those modifications. So let's go ahead and jump out of this brain now, and I'm going to jump into my own personal brain. So this is a brain that I use for my own personal hobbies and interests. And in this brain, I want to share with you how we can bring other ways to bring data into the brain. We've talked about adding notes into the brain. We've referenced web pages. So let's actually bring some web content into the brain. So this is a very personal topic for me. I'm an amateur woodworker, and my kids and I are looking to put together a cedar strip wood canoe. And this is where I'm doing all of the research. I've never done this before, so my kids and myself, we're educating ourselves. And anytime I collect a piece of data, it goes right here into the brain, so I can keep all of that information together. First and foremost, I've got two different boat designers. We decided on going with a design from Ash's Stillwater Boats. This Bear Mountain Boats was sort of on the board for a little while. We decided not to use that. Notice Bear Mountain Boats also falls under canoe kits, another topic of all canoe kit manufacturers. But they are not going to be used for my Allure Bloom canoe, so I'm simply going to right-click on the link between these two thoughts and select to unlink. So it's very easy to, I'm not deleting the thought in that scenario. I might use them in the future, I'm sure I will, but not for this project, so I've simply unlinked from this topic. And the great thing about keeping all of this information together is it doesn't matter the type of content, whether it's an email, a web page, a document, just an idea. You can see I've got meeting notes over on the right. I've got just some basic information about I have to print out my designs, and those are 24 by 36 inch sheets, and that's $5.10 a sheet at FedEx Printing. So I just made a nice little note when I found that information out. Cedar strips, I found a little image online of what all the cedar strip shapes should look like when you run them through the router. So I copied the graphic, as you can see, pasted that right there into the thought with a couple of notes down below, and even took a screenshot of how much cedar boards cost that I'll be purchasing at Home Depot, and paste that information into this brain as well. And that, as you can see, is linked up to my local Home Depot, where I've got their phone number and my credit line, and everything is, all that information is in that area of my brain. But here's what I want to share with you today. I also have information on sawhorses. I need to build some specific types of sawhorses to actually be the right shape to hold a cedar strip canoe. And I found a website. So this is just going to be a quick lesson in linking web content into the brain. And there it is. That's the website I want. And so I've got this information online, how to build simple stackable sawhorses. I've decided this is a great design and is really going to be versatile and useful for me. So I've got this web page open. It's this easy. I simply click and drag that icon right there in the address bar right into the brain. Now that works great if you have your brain open. But there are many different ways to bring information into the brain. Here's another web page. Let's say I don't particularly have the brain open, and this is all about building paddles, a little bit of a different topic, so I wasn't even in the right area of my brain. I want to send this information into my brain, but I'm going to reference it later. It's going to be in a different location within the brain. So for this scenario, I'm using another feature of the brain called the brain box. The brain box is a really great way to gather information into the brain that you're creating to be organized or classified at a later date. Here I've got this really great resource that I need to save. I might not find this URL again in the future, so I'm just going to click on this little icon for the brain box. Now first it wants me to log in because it needs to know what account to send this to. So there's me and my password. And that information is then sent over into my brain box. And when I'm back in the brain At any time, if I am in the right area and I want to gather something from the brain box, I can just click the brain box icon and drag that in. Now notice it hasn't shown up quite yet because the sync needs to kick off before it'll show up. But soon I'll have that link here. And let's say this was the thought that I want to bring in. I can just click the paper clip and that information is then added as an attachment on the current active thought. So I've just added this particular thought, which I actually already have, as an attachment for my current active thought. And if I don't want that there, I could just right click and delete. That's just a sample page that I use for that example. So very quickly, just reviewing the brain box, another great way of capturing information, sending it into your brain to be cataloged later. And that's really, really important when you are studying a particular topic or concept. You find something online that's very, very valuable. That brain box is a really, really great way to preserve that information without the trouble of launching your brain, finding the area where you want that saved. It's a reference on Hamlet for a paper you're writing. You don't even have your Shakespeare Brain open right now. So from the website you're on, you send it into your brain to be categorized and captured in the right area at a later date. That is what the brain box is all about. So now we've brought in web content. We've sent web content into the brain from the brain box. I also want to share with you all of these zoomable icons. It's so nice to have these visual references to very important information. So here on this stackable sawhorses, what do they look like? Well, I've got to wait for the web page to load up here in the content window. There's some ads up at the top, and then once I scroll down, well, actually, there's a pretty good picture down below. But let's say there's a better picture, which is the reason why I really like them. There it is, those stackable icons. So let's bring the web page back up one more time. And let's say I was on those stackable, or that stacked picture. This is the picture that I want to preserve. So I reference, oh yeah, I really like the way these stack. They won't take up much room in my workshop. This is it. So with this image in the background, now I can right click and then copy in my brain. But another way that works really, really well is to start from the brain. I right click on the thought and I select to capture an image. Now the brain minimizes and I'm left with whatever was behind the brain open on the screen. There's my image that I want to capture. And I can just simply click and drag. Hopefully you can see these two little red reference lines. And I simply gather up or capture a nice image that becomes a zoomable icon. So in my web content that is appearing in the brain's built-in browser, I don't have to be down at that area of the thought or that area of the content. I can just hover over that image and see that nice zoomable icon. Zoomable icons are really, really great feature. Particularly, we find with students and educators, so you can get that nice visual reference of the subject matter you may happen to be talking about. And with that, let's jump out of this brain and into the final brain that I'll share with you today. And this, once again, is one of those brains where you can have a copy of this brain. I'm happy to share this brain with the world. This is my Shakespeare brain. And I am a very amateur, I would say, student of Shakespeare, not student of the guy Shakespeare, but student of his writings. And so I read a lot of Shakespeare. I enjoy it. I enjoy seeing Shakespeare. And sometimes when I present this brain, I've been confronted with this question. Well, yeah, that's great. You gathered up the complete works of Shakespeare and put it into one brain. That's all over the web. All of Shakespeare's work can be found online. So you could do a quick Google search and find A Midsummer Night's Dream. But this particular brain is my, I would say, gathered knowledge, what I've learned about Shakespeare over the years and how I access this information. So I reference Midsummer Night's Dream because it's actually my favorite Shakespearean play, and I can click to go directly to that thought. But notice that Midsummer Night's Dream, it falls under comedy. Those of you that know Shakespeare, that's pretty obvious. Sometimes it's not so obvious whether a play is a comedy, a history, or a tragedy. Falls under a category I've created called one of my favorites, so I can just quickly get to my favorite topics. It also falls under the Lord Chamberlain era of Shakespeare. Now, this is highly debatable. There's no fact to this little timeline that I've created. But in the research that I've done about the man Shakespeare, many different authorities greater than myself sort of categorize, and this ends up to being displayed in many different ways. This is the way that works for me. They categorize different phases of Shakespeare's life when he wrote plays, or when it's reported or believed that he wrote those plays, who he was working for at the time, what play did he write first, what play did he write next. That's some really, really valuable information, and you won't find that simply by reading A Midsummer Night's Dream or reading maybe the Wikipedia page. They're not going to talk about what he wrote right before that, what he wrote afterwards, how many kids he had at the time, was he married, where was he living, etc. So you can see Lord Chamberlain, there was a time when he was hired by Lord Chamberlain, and these are the plays that he wrote. Henry IV, Part 1 and 2, some pretty heavy stuff. Richard, also pretty heavy. A lot of comedies, Merchant of Venice, Much Ado, Midsummer, Love's Labor Lost, Merry Wives of Windsor. So even though he was sort of at both extremes, writing some really heavy history plays, and then also some very lighthearted comedies as well. No tragedies in this area. Well, you could categorize some of what happened in Henry and Richard as tragedy, but those are officially a history. So sorry, I get a little, I get a little excited in talking about this, but the fact remains that that information, just knowing and understanding that about Midsummer Night's Dream, sometimes just adds that greater concept of where he was in his life when he wrote this play. Down below, as you can see, I've got sort of these are some of the main characters, and I've sort of mapped out sort of the plot line of the play itself. So Aegeus was the father of Hermia. And Aegeus is actually setting up a wedding, if I remember correctly, for Hermia. Hermia is in love with Lysander. Let's click on Lysander. Lysander is in love with Helena. Helena is in love with Demetrius. Demetrius is in love with Hermia. So there you can see is the love. It's not a triangle, it's more of a square, but a comedy ensues. The four lovers, each chasing one another, chase each other into the woods and set forth on this wonderful, wonderful play that I love. So, and of course, maybe you noticed as I was clicking from thought to thought to thought, I've got sort of the character study, so more about the character and information about them in the play and other characters they play, the play within the play, etc. So additional context and additional information that's hard to gather up all in one location when you're researching online. And once again, I'll take you back to some of my own discoveries. There's no factual information that backs this up, but I challenge you, if you know A Midsummer Night's Dream, to watch a 1991 Steve Martin movie called L.A. Story. L.A. Story is A Midsummer Night's Dream based in Los Angeles, 1991. And the four lovers, instead of going off into the woods, they go to a retreat in Santa Barbara or something like that. Hilarious movie, and the connections between L.A. Story and Midsummer Night's Dream are just, to me, absolutely uncanny. And of course, it's also linked to the movie Midsummer Night's Dream. Another really great one about sort of a related movie is Hamlet. If you know anything about Hamlet, I'll jump over to, Hamlet the play. Oh, that's the character study, sorry. Let's go to Hamlet the play. The Lion King is Hamlet. There's no other way to see it. And that's actually been, other people have pointed that out. I'm no genius by discovering that. But the young prince, his father is viciously murdered by his father's own brother that takes over the kingdom. The prince is expelled, but he finds his true courage and comes back to defeat the king. It's all there, and I could be referencing Hamlet or The Lion King, depending on what was in your mind at that particular time. And at that time, Hamlet was writing for 1599 for the Globe. And let's go to the timeline, 1611 to retirement. And this is when setting up this brain really hit home for me. And this is, again, just a great reference and sort of a great conclusion in our call today about how you can learn from the brain that you are creating. I set up that information to find out more about the plays that I was reading, what was happening in Shakespeare's life at the time. I read The Tempest in high school, and it didn't hit home with me at all. I was not connected to it in any way. I didn't understand if The Tempest was a comedy or a tragedy. What's going on here? Is it Shakespeare's attempt at weird sci-fi? I didn't know. It was completely meaningless to me. Once I put this brain together and I realized that The Tempest is the last reported play ever written by Shakespeare. At the end of The Tempest, there's a character called Prospero in The Tempest. And at the very end, Prospero is sent out into across the sea on a new journey. And he, if I remember correctly, it's been a while since I've read it. He's a magician, and he buries, he drowns his magic book at the end of the play and asks the audience to give him applause to send him on his way. It's the last play that Shakespeare ever wrote, and you wonder if, did he know that I'm burying my pen? I'm bidding farewell to not only the stage, but to the life. Wish me well, here I go on my next journey. That's exactly what Prospero asked for, and it's exactly what happened with Shakespeare. So suddenly it became incredibly powerful and poignant, and I can read this play with sort of a new set of eyes. So again, that's the brain teaching me more meaningful information about the data that I'm collecting, the information that I'm putting together. And of course, once again, we can have fun with this and link up The Tempest rather to the movie Shakespeare in Love. They reference The Tempest at the end very nicely. And I also have a link to The Tempest of, someone else told me about this once, and I see it now as well, Forbidden Planet. All these strangers coming together on a strange island. Sailors and Forbidden Planet, they're people that are in their ship, astronauts, etc. So, but some very close references between Warning Will Robinson and the characters within in The Tempest as well. So a lot of fun to be had there. And elsewhere in this brain, since I'll be sharing this with you, is you can educate yourself about Shakespeare. Shakespeare is not easy to read, so I've got some really great resources in this brain, and I reference these resources as well. Even though I'm putting together a brain about Shakespeare and all the wonderful connections that I find within his writings, I still need to come back and look through the Shakespeare dictionary. This is the dictionary that I put together. Anytime I find a word, I have to reference it. What is a jennet? A jennet is a Spanish horse. If you didn't know that, you would read the line about a jennet and thinking, what? I have no idea what he's talking about. So anyhow, this is a very helpful for me just to reference from time to time. And if I find a word like a clangor, so clangor, there it's showing up in the dictionary, and I can see that it's also showing up in Henry IV, part 2 and part 3, not in part 1. And I can click and go directly to Henry IV, part 3. And notice as attachments, I have the complete work of Shakespeare. So in each attachment, I have the full play actually there added as a TXT file. So it displays in the content window, shows up in the search, and is easily accessible. So a lot of great references and also just a lot of fun. And this brain, once again, I've synced it to the cloud, and it's available for download, so you can have your own local copy of this brain online if that interests you. And with that, we've covered a lot of ground today, visualizing the brain, using the brain for study guides and references, as well as different ways of visualizing your information, accessing your information, and learning from your information moving forward. So with that, we're going to jump over into the question panel. And I do see that Jay really had his hands full today. A lot of questions that came up today. So hopefully many that we got to or that were answered later in the webinar. If we didn't get to your question, I apologize. Send a note into support@thebrain.com, and we'll see if we can answer your specific question. Also, a couple of questions that did come up that I do want to answer is people want to know how to access the online knowledge base. So if you go to www.thebrain.com/support, and actually I'll bring that up here on the Brain website. So if you go to the Brain website and under Learn, if you go into our support, there is a link at the very bottom of the support page. This knowledge base is gaining popularity. It's buried maybe a little bit in our website. We're going to sort of make some changes to make this more easily accessible. But at thebrain.com/support, there's a link, and there's the online knowledge base. So this entire brain, and actually if now I do a search for icon, custom icons, and file size and recommendations, the thought that I just created during our webinar together today. So that information is available online. So this brain is available for you to browse through online. It's a great, great resource for learning the brain and very relevant to our call today. And also the next question that came up quite a few times, Jay mentions the difference between types and tags. The key differences between thought types and tags are, number one, a thought can only have one thought type associated with it. So since my brain is opened here to the Shakespeare Brain, I'll just jump into Sonnets, and I'll actually go to my favorite sonnet, Thy Gifts, Thy Tables. The reason why I like this sonnet so much, let's just read the first few lines. Thy gifts, thy tables are within my brain, full charactered with lasting memory. So that was written by Shakespeare, but it also applies to the brain technology, the software. The gifts, everything that you're given or everything you receive, thy tables, thy data, thy information are within my brain, my digital brain, full charactered, meaning displayed 100% completely mapped out with lasting memory. It never goes away. Shakespeare gave us the description of the brain software. I see things maybe a little differently than other people do, but that one has always really stuck with me. So anyhow, this is one of my favorite sonnets. You can see it's a thought type sonnet. It's never going to be anything else. It is a sonnet, but I might have some different thought tags, and here's where tags come into play. Tags can be applied in multitude on an individual thought. So what do I like to say? I always like to say a tag is an attribute of a thought. So if I open up the thought properties, I have a couple of tags in this particular brain, whether I've read it or not. So yes, I have read this sonnet. And playing soon, this isn't a play, so it doesn't really apply, but it is one of my favorites. So I've read it and it's one of my favorites. So two tags associated with this thought, which is a sonnet. Sonnet is the thought type. Tags are attributes of that thought. There's no right or wrong as far as when you want to create a thought type versus a thought tag. Here you can see is another thought with a tag, playing soon. Oh, the reason why I did this is because a friend of mine actually used this particular sonnet in their wedding. So I just actually tagged it because I had to read it in their wedding. So playing soon is what I put on there. My local high school is actually putting on A Midsummer Night's Dream. That's one of my favorites, and I'm going to tag this as playing soon as well. So I can go right-click on the thought and go up to thought tags. So many different ways you can apply thought tags. to a particular thought, whether you open up the thought properties or just right click. But again, and most importantly, thought types, one thought type, one category that is that thought, but multiple attributes. Here's Taming of the Shrew. You can see it has 3 tags associated with it. I've read it, I've been in it, and I've seen it. So actually I've been in A Midsummer Night's Dream as well, playing, it's been a while, Lysander. So I right click and change the thought type, or excuse me, change the thought tag to, I thought I had a tag, need to read in it. So I've been in that in the past as well, back in the day. So regardless, use them how you wish. Those are a few examples. And again, we've got some great tutorials on our website that talk more about the differences and the things you can do with thought types and tags. They're searchable. So if I want, or I could just sort of speed up the search. I want to see all the thoughts that are my favorites. And there they are. So a couple of them are plays, a couple of them are sonnets. Here's one. The Shakespeare action figure, of course, is one of my favorites, and Shakespeare for kids, because my kids enjoy playing a couple of very simple Shakespearean games that sort of introduce them to Shakespeare. And Jay is telling me, put up the link to the Shakespeare Brain. A lot of people are asking for it. So great, I will do that right now. If I go back to the website, thebrain.com, and at the very bottom of the app page, so if I go to Learn Applications, these are all, oh, it's not at the bottom, vacation planning is down there. So these are all the sort of different topics that we hold from time to time, but Shakespeare is under today's topic, right? Sort of related, writing and creative projects. So Shelley's Writer Brain is there to download, and there's the Shakespeare Brain. You can download your own copy. I'll make one of these pages as after our webinar today and send everyone on today's webinar a link. You'll have access to all the different brains that in some capacity, except for my own personal brain about canoe building, you'll have access to those. And then the last question, since I see we're right on top of the hour, thank you, Jay, and everyone. Let's all give Jay applause for handling all these questions today. But Jay says that Julian asked the question, one of my brains is who offered who in Hamlet. Then I pipe it into my 3D visualizer. I would love to see that. So I think there may have been some miscommunication in the killed, oft. Thank you, Jay. I thought you were typing offered. Who oft who in Hamlet, and then you pipe it into my 3D visualizer. I would absolutely love to see that, Julian. So Julian, send a note into support@thebrain.com. Just say attention, Matt. And oh, it wasn't a question, just a statement. No worries. Thank you, Jay. And thank you, Julian, for writing that in. I would love to see that. And that actually could be mapped out in the brain. We looked at who loved who in Midsummer Night's Dream, but who oft who in Hamlet, and many of his plays, we could actually, yes, many of his plays. I won't say the name of the play that I'm thinking of, McPlay, if you know what I mean. But nonetheless, thank you everyone for joining me today. And if you do have another question about today's webinar or a topic that we didn't cover, please feel free to send them into support@thebrain.com. We'd love to hear from you and answer any additional questions that you may have. Again, everyone that joined today will receive a thank you email with the email address that you logged in with, and you'll receive links to all of the brains, and there will be a link on our homepage tomorrow to today's recording and all the different brains that were discussed and can be shared with you. So thanks everyone, have a wonderful rest of the week, and as always, enjoy your brain. Thanks, bye.